A Hell's Angel saw his neighbor's daughter searching trash for her next meal. Then he opened her front door. The engine noise faded as Jake Miller turned his motorcycle onto Maple Street, the last light of the day sinking behind the rooftops. He rolled slowly past the mailboxes and parked cars, the way he always did, careful not to wake sleeping babies or rattle old Mrs. Henderson's windows 2 doors down. Some folks thought a Hell's Angel roaring through a quiet neighborhood didn't care who he bothered. Jake cared more than most. He pulled into his driveway and cut the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy, the way it always did when the ride ended and the house waited for him, empty and dark. Jake was 45 years old, built like a man who had spent his whole life working with his hands. His arms were thick and scarred, covered in old tattoos that had faded to a dull blue over the years. His beard was gray at the edges, his leather vest worn soft from decades of wear. He looked like trouble. He looked like the kind of man mothers warned their children about. He pulled off his helmet and set it on the seat, running a hand through his gray hair. Across the street, he noticed Mrs. Henderson peek through her curtains, then quickly let them fall back into place. Jake didn't blame her. People had been doing that to him for years. He was used to it by now, or at least he told himself he was. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now, back to the story. He walked up to his porch, boots heavy on the wooden steps, and unlocked his front door. Inside, his house was small and plain. A worn couch, a television he rarely watched, a kitchen table with only one chair pulled out, because only one person ever sat there. Jake set his keys on the counter and opened the refrigerator. Not much inside, just the basics. He grabbed a jug of water and drank straight from it, then walked to the back door leading to his yard. Behind his garage, in the shadows near the fence, 3 scrawny cats waited for him. They came every evening, slipping out from under the broken shed 2 houses down. Jake knelt and set out a bowl of dry food he kept in a bag by the door. He never told anyone about the cats. It wasn't the kind of thing a man like him was supposed to do, not according to the way people saw him. "There you go," he murmured, voice low and rough but gentle. One of the cats, a thin orange tabby, brushed against his boot before eating. Jake stayed crouched there a moment longer, watching them, feeling something settle in his chest that he couldn't quite name. Later that night, after cleaning up the kitchen and locking the doors, Jake walked out to his garage. This was where he spent most of his evenings, surrounded by tools and old motorcycle parts, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. He had an old motorcycle up on blocks, one he had been fixing for months. It wasn't for himself. It belonged to a young man down the street whose father had passed, and Jake had offered to get it running again for free. Nobody knew that either. Jake pulled a stool close to the bike and picked up a wrench, working on the engine with slow, careful movements. His hands, so rough and scarred, moved with surprising gentleness over the machine. As he worked, his mind drifted, the way it always did in the quiet hours of the night. He thought about the highway, the twisted metal, the smoke and the pain and the darkness pressing in around him, and the voice. A steady voice, calm even as flames crackled somewhere behind them. "Stay awake. Stay with me. You're not done yet." Jake had never seen the man's face clearly, just the shape of him, kneeling over the wreckage, pulling him free with strong, sure hands. A firefighter, a stranger who had saved his life and vanished into the night before Jake could even ask his name. He set the wrench down and sat there a moment, staring at nothing. Somewhere out there, that man was living his life, never knowing what his kindness had meant. Jake had spent years wishing he could find him, Thank him. Repay him somehow. He picked the wrench back up and kept working, the old regret settling over him like it always did, quiet and heavy, refusing to let go. The next evening came in gray and quiet, the kind of evening where the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. Jake was back in his garage, same stool, same wrench, same bike up on its blocks. He had made good progress on the engine. Another few nights, and it would run again. He was reaching for a rag to wipe his hands when he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. Something small, moving fast between the houses behind his property. Jake set the rag down and stepped toward the garage door, staying in the shadows out of habit. He looked out across the row of backyards, past the chain-link fences and the sagging clotheslines, to where the trash bins sat lined up for morning pickup. A small figure crouched by one of the bins. Jake squinted. It was dark, but there was enough light from a nearby porch to make out who it was. Lily Carter. He knew her the way you know a neighbor's kid without ever really talking to them. 10 years old? Maybe 11? Lived 2 houses down in the little house with the crooked door. Her mother, Emma, kept to herself mostly. Jake had seen the girl before, walking to the bus stop with her backpack, always looking a little too serious for a kid her age. Right now, she looked like she was trying to disappear. Lily glanced over her shoulder, checking the street, checking the windows of the houses around her. Jake stayed still, half hidden behind the garage door, watching without meaning to spy, unable to look away. She lifted the lid of one bin slowly, wincing at the small creak it made. She reached inside and pulled out something wrapped in plastic. She turned it over in her hands, checking it before setting it carefully into a backpack that hung open at her feet. Jake's chest tightened. He had seen hunger before. He had lived rough patches of his own life, years back, before the club, before he had learned how to take care of himself. He knew the way a person moved when they were searching for something they needed and trying not to be seen doing it. Lily moved exactly like that. Quick hands, careful eyes, shoulders pulled in like she was trying to make herself small enough to disappear. She checked another bin. This one had 2 containers, still sealed, tossed out from someone's fridge clean out. She took both, tucking them beside the first one in her backpack, then zipped it partway so nothing would show. Jake's first instinct was anger, not at the girl, at the world, at whatever had happened that left a 10-year-old kid sneaking through trash cans in the dark like she had no other choice. He thought about walking over, saying something, maybe even scaring off whatever fear kept her looking over her shoulder every few seconds. But something stopped him. It was the way she checked the bins, quick and quiet, like a small animal that had learned the world wasn't always kind. If he startled her now, if he called out or stepped into the light too fast, she would run. Kids like that always ran first and asked questions never. So Jake stayed still. Lily zipped her backpack the rest of the way and swung it over her shoulders. She looked both ways one more time, and then started walking, cutting across the yard behind the houses, moving fast but trying to look like she wasn't in a hurry. Jake watched her go. She wasn't heading toward the street. She wasn't heading anywhere that looked like trouble, not the kind he had first feared. She was heading straight home, toward the little house with the crooked door, 2 doors down from his own. That was when it hit him. She wasn't stealing food for herself to eat right there in secret. She wasn't some kid sneaking snacks behind her parents' backs. She was carrying it home, bringing it back like it was groceries, like it was supposed to feed more than just her. Jake felt something shift low in his stomach, a mix of worry and a strange, aching sadness. He stepped out of the garage without really deciding to. He didn't call her name. He didn't want to scare her, didn't want to make her feel caught doing something shameful. He just wanted to see. Quietly, keeping his distance, staying in the shadows the way he always did when he didn't want to be noticed, Jake followed her. Lily moved fast across the dead grass, her backpack bouncing against her spine. Jake stayed 20 feet back, keeping to the shadows between the fence posts. He felt strange doing this, a grown man sneaking through backyards after a little girl, but something told him he needed to see where this went. She cut through a gap in the chain-link fence, the kind of gap only a kid would know about, and came out into a small yard littered with dead leaves and a rusted swing set nobody had used in years. The grass hadn't been cut in a long time. Weeds grew up through cracks in the old concrete walkway. And there was the house. Jake had passed it 100 times without really looking at it. Now he looked. The porch sagged on one side, the wood soft and gray from rain that had never been sealed out. One of the porch steps was missing completely, just a gap where a board used to be. The porch light hung crooked from its socket, bulb long since burned out, dead bugs collected in the glass fixture like a little graveyard. The front door was the worst part. It hung at a slight angle, one hinge torn loose from the frame. Someone had tried to fix it with duct tape wrapped around the hinge, but the tape had peeled and curled from age. A gap showed between the door and the frame wide enough to fit 2 fingers through. The windows were dark. Not just unlit. Dark in a way that felt hollow, like nobody had turned on a light in there for a long time, except when they absolutely had to. Lily struggled with the door, pushing her shoulder into it to force it open without making it creak too loud. She slipped inside, backpack and all, and pulled it shut behind her as best she could, though it didn't sit right in the frame anymore. Jake stood at the edge of the yard, hidden by the dark, and felt something harden in his chest. Not anger this time, something heavier, something that felt like grief for people he didn't even know yet. He walked closer. Through the gap in the door, he heard voices. Lily's, quiet and quick, and another voice, a woman's, tired and thin, the kind of tired that lived in a person's bones. "I already ate," the woman was saying. "You don't need to worry about me, baby." "But Mom..." "Lily, please. Just eat what you brought. I'm fine." Jake stood on the broken porch step, his boots heavy against the old wood, and something in him refused to walk away. He had spent years letting people avoid him, letting them think what they wanted, staying quiet because it was easier. But he could not stay quiet now. Not with a kid searching trash cans 2 doors down from where he slept every night. He knocked. The voices inside went silent. He heard fast whispering, feet moving, the small metallic sound of something being hidden. He knocked again, softer this time. No answer came, but he heard it. A held breath, a held breath. Jake reached out and pushed the door. It swung open easily, the broken hinge giving no resistance at all. Inside was a small living room, lit only by the gray light coming through the window. Jake saw it all at once, the way a person sees a car accident, every detail landing on top of the last one. Bills stacked on the coffee table, some of them stamped in red ink. A single lamp with no shade. A couch with a blanket folded neatly on one end, like someone had been sleeping there instead of a bed. Through the doorway to the kitchen, he saw the counter. Empty, except for a few unopened food containers Lily had just carried in. The refrigerator door was cracked open slightly, and even from here Jake could see there was almost nothing inside it. Emma Carter stood near the kitchen table, one hand pressed to her chest, eyes wide with a fear that looked older than her face. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept properly in months. Her hair was pulled back messy, her clothes hung a little loose, like she'd lost weight she didn't have to lose. She looked at Jake the way people usually looked at him, afraid, ready to apologize for something she hadn't done. Jake stood in the doorway, filling it with his broad frame, and for the first time in a long while, he did not think about how frightening he looked to other people. He thought about the empty refrigerator, the unpaid bills, the little girl standing frozen by the counter, clutching her backpack like it held the last good thing she owned. And he made up his mind. Jake left without saying much. He walked back through the gap in the fence, back to his own garage, and he grabbed the spare key hanging by his workbench for the old truck he barely used anymore. Then he drove to the store. He filled 2 carts: bread, eggs, milk, canned soup, rice, chicken, vegetables, peanut butter, a box of cereal Lily's age might like, paper towels, dish soap, laundry detergent. He grabbed a toolbox from the truck bed before heading back, the same one he used to fix bikes for guys in his club. He figured that door wasn't going to fix itself. When he pulled up outside the Carter house, the porch light was still dark. He carried the bags up the broken step, careful not to trip, and knocked with his elbow since his hands were full. Emma opened the door slower this time. She looked at the bags, then at Jake's face, and her own face crumpled with something between relief and shame. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," Jake said. "I wanted to." She stepped back to let him in, but she wouldn't look at him now. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold, even though the house wasn't cold at all. "I don't know what you think of us," Emma said quietly. "I know how this looks." Jake set the bags down on the kitchen counter, next to the empty containers Lily had brought home earlier. He didn't say anything right away. He started pulling things out, lining up cans, setting the chicken by the stove, finding a pot in the cabinet without asking where it was. "I'm not here to think anything," he said finally. "I'm here because a family needed groceries and I had a truck." "We're not," Emma's voice cracked. "We're not usually like this. I had a job, I lost it. Then the bills came faster than I could keep up, and I didn't want Lily to know how bad it got." "She knew," Jake said gently. "That's why she was digging through trash cans tonight." Emma's hand went to her mouth. Her eyes filled up fast, and she turned away like she could hide it. "I'm so ashamed," she whispered. "I'm supposed to take care of her, not the other way around." Jake turned the stove on and found a knife in the drawer. He started cutting the chicken, calm and steady, like this was something normal people did every night. "Needing help doesn't make you a failure," he said. "It makes you human. Everybody needs somebody at some point. Took me a long time to learn that myself." From the hallway, Lily peeked around the corner. She'd been listening the whole time, backpack still slung over one shoulder like she wasn't sure if she was in trouble. Jake caught her eye and gave her a small nod, the kind that said it's okay. "Come on in." She stepped into the kitchen slow, watching him cook like she couldn't quite believe it was happening. "You know how to cook?" she asked. "Enough to keep from starving," Jake said. "My mother taught me. Told me a man should know how to feed himself and anybody else who needs it." That got the smallest smile out of Lily, the first one Jake had seen from her all night. He made a simple meal. Chicken, rice, some vegetables, nothing fancy. But he made enough for 3, and when he set 2 plates down for Emma and Lily, he made a plate for himself too, without asking, and sat down at the small table like it was the most natural thing in the world. Emma stared at her plate for a long moment before she picked up her fork. Jake noticed she took small bites, slow ones, like she was savoring something she hadn't let herself have in a long time. Lily ate like a kid who was finally allowed to be a kid again, not worried about saving half for later, not glancing at her mother to see if there was enough to go around. After dinner, Jake helped put the rest of the groceries away. He left them with enough food to get through the week. Maybe longer if they were careful. He didn't say much else. He just made sure the refrigerator wasn't empty anymore before he stepped back out onto the porch. Driving home that night, Jake gripped the steering wheel tighter than he needed to. Groceries would fix hunger for a few days, but that door hanging by one hinge, the stack of red-stamped bills on the coffee table, the way Emma flinched like she expected to be judged for surviving, none of that would be solved with a trip to the store. He knew then he wasn't just going to drop off some food and walk away. Whatever was happening in that house went deeper than an empty refrigerator, and Jake couldn't pretend he hadn't seen it. Jake woke up before the sun that morning. He didn't sleep much anyway. Old habits from his younger days, back when trouble could show up at any hour and a man needed to be ready for it. He made coffee, drank it standing up in his kitchen, and looked out the window toward the gap in the fence. The Carter house sat quiet in the gray morning light. Still there. Still standing, even if just barely. He loaded his truck with the toolbox, a new door hinge set he'd grabbed from his own garage stock, a fresh deadbolt, and a gallon of wood filler for the frame that had rotted along one edge. He'd noticed it last night when he carried the groceries in. That door wasn't just broken, it was dangerous. Anybody could have pushed through it. He parked out front a little after 7 and carried his tools up the porch steps. He knocked, this time with his knuckles since his hands were free. Emma answered in a robe, her hair pulled back, surprise written all over her face. "Jake, I didn't expect— Figured I'd get an early start," he said. "Door like that shouldn't wait." She stepped aside, without much argument this time. Something in her had softened overnight, like the meal and the full refrigerator had given her permission to hope a little. Lily sat at the kitchen table eating cereal from the box Jake had bought. She watched him through the doorway, spoon halfway to her mouth, her eyes following his every move like she was trying to figure out what kind of man carries a toolbox into somebody else's house before 8 in the morning. Jake set his gear down by the door and got to work. He unscrewed the broken hinges first. Careful, methodical. He'd fixed enough bikes and enough things in his life to know that most problems came down to patience. You didn't rush a repair. You figured out what was broken and you fixed it right so it didn't break again. Lily wandered closer after a while, cereal bowl forgotten. She stood a few feet back, arms crossed, watching him sand down the rotted wood on the frame. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Jake didn't look up right away. He kept working the sandpaper along the edge, smoothing out the splintered wood. "Because a door's supposed to keep people safe," he said, "not scare them every time they open it." Lily was quiet for a moment. "The other neighbors don't come over. Not since my dad died." Jake paused then. He set the sandpaper down and looked at her. "That's their loss," he said, "not yours." She didn't say anything to that. She just watched him some more, like she was still deciding what to make of him. Jake understood that. He was used to being sized up, used to people trying to figure out if the leather vest and the boots meant trouble was walking through their door. He didn't rush her. He just kept working, replacing the hinges one at a time, testing the door until it swung smooth and even, no more creaking, no more sagging on its broken frame. He installed the new deadbolt last, turning it a few times to make sure it caught clean. "There," he said, stepping back. "That ought to hold." He pushed the door shut, then opened it again, showing Lily how easy it moved now. She reached out and touched the wood, running her small fingers along the edge where the splinters used to be. "It doesn't stick anymore," she said, sounding almost amazed. "Nope," Jake said. "Should open and close easy for a long time now." Lily looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, something in her face relaxed, like a weight had come off her shoulders that she'd been carrying so long she forgot it was there. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the door. For the food. For—" She hesitated, her voice growing smaller. "Nobody's really helped us since my dad died. Everybody just kind of looked away." Jake felt something tighten in his chest, right behind his ribs. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I'll come check on you two again. Make sure everything's holding up." Lily nodded, and for the first time, there was something like trust in the way she looked at him. Small and fragile, but real. The days that followed fell into a kind of rhythm Jake hadn't expected. He'd wake up early, same as always, and before he did anything else, he'd check his own fridge and cabinets, picking out extra cans of soup, a loaf of bread, whatever fruit looked good at the store the day before. Then he'd walk through the gap in the fence, tools in one hand, groceries in the other, and knock on the Carter door with his knuckles. Some mornings Emma answered fast, like she'd been waiting. Other mornings it took her a while, and Jake could hear her moving around inside, straightening things up, like she didn't want him to see the house looking anything less than cared for. He never said anything about it. He just waited on the porch, patient as ever, until she opened the door. He fixed what he found. A loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen, a window that wouldn't latch right in Lily's room, a leaky faucet that had been dripping so long it left a rust stain in the sink. Small things, the kind of things that pile up in a house when there's nobody around with the time or money to fix them. Lily started following him from room to room, handing him tools before he even asked for them. She learned the names fast. Phillips head, wrench, wire cutters. She liked handing him things, liked being useful, and Jake liked having her there. She talked more each day, telling him about her school, about a friend named Casey who sat next to her in class, about a book she was reading about a dog that could talk. Jake found himself smiling more than he had in years. Emma was a different story. She thanked him every time he brought something, but her thanks always came with a look on her face like she was ashamed of needing it. She'd try to pay him back somehow, offering to do his laundry, offering to mend a tear she'd noticed in his jacket. Jake always waved it off, told her it wasn't necessary. But she kept trying anyway, like she couldn't stand the idea of a debt she couldn't pay. "You don't have to keep doing this," she told him one evening, standing in the kitchen doorway, while he tightened a loose hinge on the pantry door. "I know I don't have to," Jake said. "I want to." "It's a lot," she said. "The groceries, the repairs, it's too much." "It's not too much," Jake said. "It's just what neighbors do." Emma looked like she wanted to argue that point, like she wanted to tell him neighbors hadn't done a thing for her in over a year, but she didn't say it. She just nodded and went back to folding a stack of towels on the counter, her shoulders tight. It was a Thursday night when Jake noticed something that changed the way he saw all of it. He'd stayed for dinner, at Lily's insistence, sitting at the small kitchen table while Emma made spaghetti with the groceries he'd brought that morning. Lily ate 2 full plates, laughing at something Jake said about a raccoon that used to steal parts out of his garage. Emma sat across from them, pushing noodles around her plate with her fork, taking small bites here and there, but mostly just moving the food from one side to the other. Jake noticed it, but he didn't say anything right away. Later, after Lily went to bed, he stayed to help Emma clean up. He carried the pot to the sink, and that's when he saw it. Emma standing at the counter, drinking a glass of water in slow sips, her eyes closed like she was trying to fill a space in her stomach that food should have filled. "Emma," he said quietly. She opened her eyes, startled, like she'd forgotten he was still there. "You didn't eat," Jake said. "Not really?" Emma's face went pale. She set the glass down carefully, like her hands might shake if she didn't. "I ate," she said. I just wasn't that hungry tonight." "Emma?" She looked at him then, and something in her broke, quiet and sudden, like a dam that had been holding back water for far too long. "I give her the bigger plate," Emma whispered. "I tell her I already ate before she gets home from school. I've been doing it for months. I didn't want her to know how bad it got. I didn't want her to be scared." Jake stood there, the pot still in his hands, understanding hitting him slow and heavy. "That's why she was digging through the trash," he said. "She knew." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "She's been trying to help me. My own daughter has been trying to take care of me." The pot was still warm in Jake's hands when he finally set it in the sink. He didn't say anything else about the food that night. He just filled the fridge a little fuller the next morning, and the morning after that, and he made sure there were always 2 plates that looked exactly the same size, so Emma couldn't slip half of hers onto Lily's without him noticing. Over the next week, Jake became something like furniture in the Carter house. A good kind. The kind you count on being there. He showed up most afternoons right when Lily got home from school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she ran the last few steps up the porch. She'd drop her bag by the door and pull out her homework, before Jake even had his boots off. "I don't get fractions," she told him one Tuesday, sliding a worksheet across the kitchen table like it had personally wronged her. Jake looked at the paper like it was a foreign language, which, in a way, it was. He hadn't done schoolwork in 30 years. "All right," he said, pulling out a chair. "Let's figure this out together." He was no teacher. He'll be the first to admit that. But he had patience, more than most people gave him credit for, and he had a way of breaking things down that made sense to a 10-year-old. He used cans of soup from the pantry to explain fractions, cutting an apple into pieces at the counter to show her what a third looked like compared to a half. Lily caught on fast. She always did. "You're smart," Jake told her one afternoon, watching her finish the last problem on her own. "I know," Lily said, grinning, and Jake laughed so hard he had to sit down. The house started to feel different, too. Jake fixed the porch light that had been burned out for months, so now when it got dark, there was a warm, yellow glow that spilled onto the steps. He patched the hole in the living room wall, where water damage had eaten through the paint. He brought over an old space heater from his garage when he noticed how cold the house got at night. The kind of cold that got into your bones. Emma noticed all of it. She noticed the way Lily laughed more, the way her daughter didn't flinch every time the phone rang, worried it was a bill collector. She noticed the way the house felt less like a place they were surviving in, and more like a place they were living in again. For the first time in a long while, Emma let herself believe things might actually get better. She started smiling more herself. She hummed while she cooked. She stopped apologizing every 5 minutes for things that weren't her fault. One evening she even laughed at one of Jake's jokes, a real laugh, the kind that surprised her as much as it did him. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Wednesday, tucked between a flyer for a pizza place and a coupon booklet, the kind of mail most people toss without looking twice. Emma pulled it from the mailbox on her way inside, and the moment she saw the return address, her stomach dropped straight through the floor. She read it standing in the hallway, her hands shaking so bad the paper rattled. "Final notice," it said, in bold red letters at the top. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days if the balance wasn't paid in full. Emma folded the letter as small as she could get it and shoved it into the bottom drawer of the hallway table, underneath a stack of old phone books she never used. She told herself she'd deal with it later. She told herself Jake didn't need to know, that she'd caused enough trouble for him already, that this was hers to fix on her own. She didn't count on Jake needing a screwdriver from that same drawer 2 days later. He found the letter by accident, his fingers brushing against it while he dug around for the tool. He almost didn't open it. It wasn't his business, not really. But something about the way it was hidden, shoved down so deep, made his chest tighten before he even read a word. He read it twice. Emma walked into the hallway just as he finished, and the look on her face told him everything he needed to know. "Jake, I can explain," she started. "Emma?" His voice was steady, calm, but there was something underneath it, something firm. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it's not your problem," she said, her voice cracking. "It's mine. It's my mess. I let it get this bad, and I didn't want you to think—" "I don't think anything," Jake said, cutting her off gently. "Except that we're going to fix this." Emma shook her head, tears already gathering. "Jake, there's no fixing this. I don't have the money. I don't know where to even start." Jake folded the letter carefully and set it on the table between them, like a promise laid out in plain sight. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together. I'm not walking away from this house, and I'm not walking away from you or Lily. Whatever it takes, Emma, I promise you, we are going to save this home." The morning light came in soft through the kitchen window, but it did nothing to warm the feeling in the room. Jake sat at the table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, untouched. Across from him, Emma had a shoebox open, papers spilling out of it like something that had been holding its breath for a long time and finally let go. "This is everything," she said, pushing the box toward him. "Bills, bank stuff, the mortgage papers. I haven't looked at half of it in months. I couldn't." Jake pulled the box closer and started going through it, one paper at a time. His hands, so used to fixing engines and hauling steel, moved careful and slow over the pages, like he was handling something fragile. "Take your time," he said, not looking up. "We got all day." Emma wrapped both hands around her own coffee mug, more for something to hold on to than for the warmth. "After Daniel died," she started, then stopped. She took a breath and tried again. "After Daniel died, everything just piled up. The funeral costs, then the bills that kept coming like the world didn't know he was gone. I was supposed to handle all of it myself, and I didn't even know where to start. Daniel always took care of that stuff. The bills, the bank, all of it. I took care of Lily. That was the only thing I could manage." Jake nodded slowly, still scanning a stack of statements. "Nobody helped you with any of this? Family? Friends?" Emma let out a short laugh that didn't have any humor in it. "Everybody came to the funeral. Everybody said all the right things. But 6 months later, when the casseroles stopped coming and the phone calls slowed down, it was just me, except for Richard." "Richard?" "Richard Hayes," Emma said. "He worked with Daniel for a while, before Daniel went full-time at the fire department. They stayed friends. Richard came around after the funeral, said he used to help people with their finances, said he could take some of the weight off me. I was so tired, Jake. I was so tired I didn't ask him a single question. I just handed him everything and said thank you." Jake's jaw tightened, just slightly, but he kept his voice even. "And he's been handling the mortgage since then?" "He said he was," Emma said. "He told me the payments were being made. Every few months he'd bring by a paper for me to sign, tell me it was routine stuff, refinancing paperwork, insurance updates. I signed whatever he put in front of me. I trusted him. Daniel trusted him." Jake went quiet, flipping through the bank statements page by page. Something in the numbers didn't sit right in his gut. He'd spent enough years handling his own bills, his own bike shop accounts, to know what a normal payment history looked like. This wasn't normal. There were gaps. payments that should have gone out every month were missing for stretches of 3, 4, sometimes 5 months at a time. Then a payment would show up, but not for the full amount. Then more gaps. It was sloppy in a way that didn't feel like an accident. It felt like someone had been counting on nobody looking too closely. "Emma," Jake said slowly, "did you ever get anything from the bank directly? Any letters, any calls?" She frowned, thinking back. "A few times, early on. Richard told me not to worry about those. Said the bank always sends confusing paperwork after a refinance, and that he'd handle it. I stopped opening them after a while. I let him take care of it." Jake set the statement down and picked up another one, this one older, from just after Daniel's death. His eyes moved across the numbers, and he felt something cold settle into his chest. According to this document, the house had almost been paid off. Daniel had been putting extra money towards the mortgage for years, chipping away at it steadily, the way a man does when he wants his family safe, no matter what happens to him. But the balance on the foreclosure notice didn't match that at all. It was almost as high as if none of those extra payments had ever been made. Jake sat back in his chair, the papers spread out in front of him like pieces of a puzzle that were starting to form a picture he didn't like. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it before you answer." She looked at him, worry creeping into her eyes. "Okay. Do you have Richard's number? His address? Anything?" "I think so. Why?" Jake tapped the statement in front of him, his finger resting on the numbers that didn't add up. "Because something about this isn't right. And I intend to find out exactly what happened to your husband's money." Jake spent the next several days doing 2 jobs at once. In the morning, he worked on bikes in his garage, hands black with grease, radio playing low. In the afternoon, he did a different kind of work. He drove around town asking questions. He started at the fire station on 5th Street, the one where Daniel Carter had worked for almost 10 years. The building was brick and old, with a row of shiny red trucks parked inside like sleeping animals. Jake walked in wearing his leather vest, and he saw the way the young firefighter at the front desk straightened up a little, unsure what to make of him. "I'm looking for anybody who knew Daniel Carter," Jake said. "I'm a friend of his family." The young firefighter's face changed the second he heard the name. It softened, like something warm had passed through the room. "Everybody here knew Danny," he said. "Hold on! Let me get Captain Reyes." Captain Reyes was an older man, with gray at his temples and tired eyes that had seen too much smoke and too many funerals. He shook Jake's hand firm and led him to a small office in the back. "Daniel Carter was one of the best men I ever worked with," Reyes said, sitting behind a desk covered in papers. "Not because he was the strongest or the fastest, because he never stopped, even when the job was done." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. Reyes leaned back in his chair. "I mean, he'd finish a shift, and instead of going home, he'd stop by some old widow's house and fix her porch steps, or he'd drive some stranded family to a shelter on his own time. He didn't do it for credit. Half the time, we only found out because somebody else told us." Jake felt something tighten in his chest, a familiar ache he didn't understand yet. "He save anybody?" Jake asked. "On the job, I mean." Reyes let out a small laugh, not because it was funny, but because the question was almost too small for the answer. "Daniel saved more people than I can count. Car wrecks, house fires, that warehouse fire that took him in the end. He ran into buildings other guys hesitated on, never blinked." Jake looked down at his hands. "Anybody ever tell you about a highway accident? Maybe 8, 9 years back? Guy on a motorcycle?" Reyes thought for a second, shook his head. "Could have been. Danny worked a lot of highway calls before he transferred here full-time. He wasn't the type to brag about it, so half the people he pulled out of Rex probably don't even know his name. Jake sat with that for a moment, something stirring in the back of his mind, faint and far away, like a voice calling from the other side of a canyon. He remembered warm hands pulling him from twisted metal. He remembered a voice telling him to stay awake. Stay awake, don't you dare close your eyes. He remembered waking up in a hospital bed 3 days later and asking a nurse who saved him, only to be told the firefighter had already been transferred out before Jake could get his name. He never found out. He'd carried that unanswered question for years like a stone in his pocket. But he didn't put it together. Not yet. It was just a feeling, a coincidence, nothing solid enough to hold on to. He thanked Reyes and left the station, driving to a diner where a few of Daniel's old neighbors gathered for coffee most afternoons. They told him more stories. Daniel shoveling snow off an old man's driveway before sunrise. Daniel giving his own coat to a kid waiting for the bus in the cold. Daniel refusing to accept a reward after pulling a family out of a flooded car. Every story was the same shape. A man who gave without expecting anything back. By the time Jake drove home that evening, his head was full of Daniel Carter. The kind of man who ran toward danger instead of away from it. The kind of man who helped strangers and never mentioned it again. Jake sat on his porch that night with a beer he didn't drink, staring out at the dark street, thinking about how much Daniel reminded him of the man who saved his life all those years ago. The voice, the steady hands, the refusal to let him give up. He shook his head, telling himself it was probably nothing. Just a coincidence. Firefighters were like that, weren't they? Brave, selfless, quiet about it. Still, something about it wouldn't let him go. The next afternoon, Jake walked up the newly fixed porch steps of the Carter house and knocked. Lily opened the door before he even finished knocking twice. Her hair was pulled back in a messy braid, and she had a smear of peanut butter on her cheek. "Jake," she said, her whole face lighting up. "Mom's at the store. She said it's okay if you come in." Jake stepped inside, wiping his boots on the mat out of habit. The house smelled like something sweet, maybe cinnamon, and the kitchen table had a puzzle spread across it, half finished. "You want to help me with this?" Lily asked, already pulling out a chair for him. Jake lowered himself into the small wooden chair, feeling a little too big for it, and picked up a puzzle piece. "Sure, kid. What's it a picture of?" "A firehouse," Lily said, "like where my dad worked." Jake's hand paused over the puzzle box for just a second. "Yeah? You remember much about him?" Lily nodded slowly, her fingers turning a puzzle piece over and over like she was deciding how much to say. "I remember lots of things. He used to smell like smoke sometimes, even after he showered. Mom said it just got into his skin from being a firefighter so long." She fit a piece into place, the corner of a red fire truck. "He was always doing stuff for people," Lily went on. "Like, we'd be driving somewhere and he'd see somebody stuck on the side of the road, and he'd just stop. Every time. Mom used to tease him and say we were going to be late to church because he stopped to help somebody with a flat tire." Jake smiled, a small crack in his tired face. "Sounds like a good man." "He was the best," Lily said, and her voice cracked just a little, but she kept going, like she needed to say it. "He used to tell me that being kind doesn't cost anything. He said some people think being tough means being mean, but he said the toughest people are the ones who are kind even when it's hard." Jake sat very still, listening. "One time," Lily continued, "there was a man who came to our door. He didn't have a coat, and it was so cold outside. My dad gave him his own coat right off his back. Mom got kind of mad because it was his favorite one, but Dad just said, He needed it more than I did. Jake felt his throat tighten. He picked up another puzzle piece, turning it slowly in his rough fingers. He used to help people I didn't even know, Lily said. People he met on the job. He never talked about it much, but sometimes people would come find him just to say thank you. He always looked kind of embarrassed when that happened. Jake nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Lily hopped up from her chair. Want to see pictures of him? Mom keeps them in the hallway. Jake followed her down the narrow hallway, his boots heavy on the wood floor. The walls were lined with photographs in mismatched frames. Daniel at his wedding, young and grinning. Daniel holding baby Lily, looking down at her like she was the only thing in the world. Daniel standing in front of a fire truck with a group of firefighters, all of them squinting into the sun. Lily pointed at one photograph near the end of the hallway. This one's from before I was born. Mom said it was one of Dad's old highway rescue calls. Jake stepped closer, his eyes locking onto the photograph. It showed Daniel Carter standing beside a mangled motorcycle, the metal twisted and burned, firefighters and paramedics working in the background. Daniel was younger in the photo, his face streaked with soot, but his eyes were the same steady, calm eyes Jake remembered from somewhere buried deep in his mind. Jake's breath caught in his chest. He leaned in closer, his heart pounding, staring at the motorcycle in the photograph. The frame, the paint job, the shape of the twisted handlebars. It was his bike, the one from the accident 9 years ago. Jake's hands started to shake. The voice, the steady hands pulling him from the wreckage. The words that had echoed in his memory for years. Stay awake, don't you dare close your eyes. It had been Daniel Carter's voice all along. Jake stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the photograph until Lily tugged gently on his sleeve. Jake? You okay? Your face looks weird. He couldn't answer right away. His eyes kept moving from the twisted handlebars to Daniel's soot-streaked face, and every second that passed made him more certain. There was no mistaking it. That bike had been his pride and joy once, a 1978 Harley he'd rebuilt with his own 2 hands. He would know that frame anywhere, even bent and burned like it was in the photo. I need to talk to your mom, Jake said, his voice rough. When she gets home, it's important. Lily studied him with the same searching look she'd had the first night he found her by the trash cans, like she could see straight through to whatever was troubling him. But she didn't push. She just nodded and went back to the puzzle, glancing at him every few minutes while they waited. Emma came home 20 minutes later, arms full of grocery bags. Jake met her at the door and took the bags from her without a word, setting them on the counter. Something in his face must have told her this wasn't a normal visit. Jake, what's wrong? He led her to the hallway, to the photograph. His finger, thick and calloused, pointed at the motorcycle in the background. That's my bike, he said quietly. That accident. 9 years ago on Route 9. That was me. Emma's face went pale. She looked at the photo, then at Jake, then back at the photo again, like she was trying to make the 2 versions of the story fit together in her mind. Daniel pulled you out, she whispered. I never saw his face clear. I was fading in and out, but I heard his voice the whole time. He kept telling me to stay awake, kept saying it over and over so I wouldn't close my eyes. Jake's hands were shaking again. I spent 9 years wondering who that voice belonged to. I looked for him. I asked around at hospitals, fire stations, anybody who might know. I never found him. Emma pressed a hand over her mouth. Tears filled her eyes, and she leaned against the wall like her legs had gone weak. He never told me the name of the man he saved that night, she said. He just came home and said it was a bad one. Said the motorcycle was in pieces and he wasn't sure the guy was going to make it. He didn't sleep for 2 nights after that call. I remember because he kept getting up to check on you, even though he was home and you were miles away in a hospital bed." Jake's throat tightened so hard he could barely speak. "I never got the chance to thank him. By the time I was strong enough to go looking, I didn't even know his name, and now he's gone," Emma finished softly. "And you're standing in our hallway." They stood there together in silence, the weight of it settling over both of them. Lily had wandered back down the hall and stood quietly at the edge of the kitchen doorway, listening. "I spent years wanting to pay him back," Jake said, his voice breaking. "Years thinking about what I'd say if I ever found him. And I never got to do it. I thought that debt was just gone. Something I'd carry and never get to settle." Lily walked over and slipped her small hand into his rough, calloused one. "You don't have to pay him back, Jake," she said, looking up at him with her father's steady eyes. "You already did. You just did it to me and Mom instead." Jake looked down at her, his chest tight with emotion he didn't have words for. "My dad always said helping people isn't about getting something back," Lily continued. "He said you just help because somebody needs it. That's what he'd want. He'd want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing for us." Emma wiped her eyes and nodded, reaching out to touch Jake's arm. "She's right. This is exactly the kind of thing Daniel would have wanted. He'd be glad it was you who found us that night. He'd be glad it came full circle like this." Jake looked between the two of them, feeling something shift deep inside his chest, something that felt like purpose finally settling into place after years of searching for it. The next few weeks brought changes that the whole street could see. First, it was the porch. Jake showed up on a Saturday morning with Tom Walker and 2 other guys from the club, all of them carrying lumber and toolboxes like they were heading into battle. By noon, the crooked front door was gone, replaced with a solid one that actually closed all the way. By evening, fresh boards had replaced the rotten porch steps. Mrs. Bennett, who lived 3 houses down, watched the whole thing from her window. She had lived on this street for 20 years and had never once seen anyone fix up the Carter house since Daniel passed. She had also never once spoken to the big man on the motorcycle who scared her a little every time he rode by. But she kept watching. The next weekend, Jake and Tom painted the shutters a warm shade of blue, the same color Emma said Daniel had always wanted to paint them. Lily helped too, her small hands covered in paint up to her elbows, laughing every time Jake pretended to flick a brush at her. Sarah Bennett finally worked up the courage to walk over. "I don't mean to bother you," she said, standing at the edge of the yard with her arms crossed against the cold. "But I noticed you've been out here a lot." Jake set down his paintbrush and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Yes, ma'am. Just helping out where I can." "That's kind of you." Sarah studied him for a moment, the way people do when they are trying to match what they see with what they expected. "I'll be honest. I always thought you were, well, I thought you were someone to stay away from." Jake didn't get angry. He just nodded slowly. Most people do. "I was wrong," Sarah said simply. "I can see that now." She didn't say much else that day, but the next morning she showed up with a casserole dish and a bag of vegetables from her garden, setting them on the Carter's front step before knocking. Word spread quickly after that. Not the way gossip usually spreads on a street like this, full of whispers and judgment. This was different. This was neighbors talking to each other with something like wonder in their voices. "Did you hear what happened to Emma and Lily? Did you know Daniel was the one who saved that biker years ago? Did you see what Jake's been doing to that house?" Some of it wasn't accurate. Some of it got twisted a little, the way stories do. But the heart of it stayed the same. A family had been quietly falling apart, and a man everyone had been afraid of was the one who noticed, the one who stepped in, the one who stayed. By the following week, things started showing up at the Carters' door. A box of canned goods from the Hendersons across the street. A gift card to the grocery store from a family Emma barely knew. A stack of children's books for Lily, left with a note that just said, "For the little girl who deserves good things." Tom Walker showed up one afternoon with a truck full of lumber for the back fence, grinning at Jake as he unloaded it. "Guess you started something, brother." "Wasn't trying to start anything," Jake said. "Just trying to help." "Sometimes that's how it starts," Tom said. "One person doing the right thing gets other people thinking maybe they should too." Emma stood on the porch one evening, watching a neighbor she barely knew drop off a bag of winter coats for Lily. Her eyes filled with tears, the way they had so many times these past weeks. But they were different tears now. Not the tears of someone drowning. The tears of someone finally being lifted up. "I don't understand why everyone's being so kind all of a sudden," she said quietly to Jake, who stood beside her with his arms crossed, watching the neighbor walk back to her car. "Maybe they always wanted to help," Jake said. "Maybe they just needed someone to show them how." Lily came running out onto the porch just then, holding one of the new books against her chest like a treasure. "Jake, look what Mrs. Patterson gave me." Jake smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached all the way to his eyes. "That's real nice, kid," he said. And for the first time in a long while, the Carter house didn't feel broken anymore. It felt like it was finally, truly, becoming a home again. The following Monday, Jake pulled up to the Carter house before the sun was even all the way up. He had a thermos of coffee in one hand, and a list in his head of everything that still needed doing. The roof had been bothering him for weeks. Every time it rained, he had seen the dark stain spreading across the ceiling in Lily's room, and he knew it wouldn't hold much longer. Tom Walker showed up 20 minutes later with his truck loaded down with shingles. Two other guys from the club, Big Mike and a quiet man everyone just called Ray, came right behind him on their bikes. "You didn't have to bring the whole club," Jake said, watching them unload. "Wasn't gonna let you have all the fun," Tom said, grinning. They spent the whole day up on that roof, tearing off the old broken shingles and laying down new ones. The sound of hammers echoed down the street, and more than a few neighbors stepped out onto their porches just to watch. Nobody complained about the noise. If anything, people seemed to like hearing it. It sounded like something good was happening. By Wednesday, the roof was done. Jake moved on to the inside of the house next, patching up the walls where the paint had cracked and peeled over the years. Emma picked out a soft yellow color for the kitchen, something bright and warm. The kind of color that made a room feel like morning even when it was cloudy outside. Lily wanted to help paint her own room. Jake gave her a small brush and let her cover the bottom part of the wall while he handled the higher spots. She hummed while she worked, some little tune Jake didn't recognize, and every so often she would stop and look at what she had done, proud of the crooked lines and small drips. "You're getting good at this," Jake told her. "I learned from you," she said, grinning up at him with a smudge of yellow paint on her cheek. By Thursday, they had moved to the porch. Tom and Ray rebuilt the railing that had been missing for years, and Jake hung a new porch light, one bright enough to actually light up the steps at night. No more stumbling in the dark. No more feeling like the house was hiding. Friday was the garden. Emma had mentioned it only once, almost in passing, how Daniel used to spend his Saturday mornings out back growing tomatoes and peppers and a small patch of sunflowers that Lily loved. The garden had gone wild after he passed. Weeds had taken over everything. Nobody had the heart to touch it. Jake didn't say much about it. He just showed up that morning with gardening gloves and a wheelbarrow, and he spent hours pulling weeds and turning soil until the old garden beds were visible again. Lily worked beside him, and even though she didn't say why it mattered so much, Jake could tell by the way she kept looking at the sunflower seeds in her hand. By the time the sun started going down that evening, they had planted new seeds in the same spots where Daniel's garden used to grow. Emma stepped outside just as they finished. She stood at the edge of the porch, looking out at the yard, and she didn't say anything for a long moment. The roof was fixed, the walls were painted, the porch light glowed warm and steady, and the garden, though still just soil and seeds, looked like it might actually grow again. "It looks like our house again," she said quietly. "It looks like home." Lily ran to stand beside her mother, wrapping her arms around Emma's waist. "It's even better than before," she said, "because Jake helped make it." Jake stood back near the fence, watching the two of them together on that porch, bathed in the glow of the new light. Something settled in his chest, something he hadn't expected to feel. He had come into this thinking he was just fixing a house, just helping a neighbor, just paying off some old debt he couldn't quite put into words. But standing there, watching Lily hug her mother tight, watching Emma's shoulders relax for maybe the first time in months, Jake understood something different. This wasn't just a house he was fixing. This was his family now, whether he had planned on it or not. The garden was planted, and the house was fixed, but Jake still had one job left undone. Emma had asked him, almost shy about it, if he would help her go through Daniel's old paperwork. Boxes of it sat in the hall closet, untouched since the funeral. She said she just could not bring herself to look through them alone. So on Saturday night, after Lily had gone to bed, Jake sat at the kitchen table with Emma, a stack of folders between them, the new yellow paint glowing soft under the kitchen light. "I never wanted to deal with any of this," Emma admitted, pushing a folder toward him. "Every time I opened one of these boxes, it felt like losing him all over again." Jake nodded. He understood that better than she knew. They worked through old insurance papers, tax records, and letters from the fire department thanking Daniel for his years of service. Jake read every word carefully, the way he approached everything, slow and thorough, never rushing past something that mattered. Then he found a folder marked Mortgage and Savings. Inside were bank statements, the kind that showed money moving in and out of an account. Jake had never been good with numbers, but even he could see something was wrong. There was a life insurance payout, a large one, deposited into an account almost 5 years ago, enough money to pay off the house completely and leave something behind for Emma and Lily to live on. But the account was almost empty now. Jake looked at the dates. Deposits went in right after Daniel died. Then, slowly, over the following months, money started disappearing. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones, transfers to another account Jake didn't recognize. "Emma," Jake said carefully, "did you know about this account?" Emma leaned over to look, confusion crossing her face. "That's the account Richard set up for us. He said he was handling everything after Daniel died. I trusted him. I didn't know how to deal with the paperwork, and he offered to help." She paused, her brow furrowing as she studied the numbers. "He told me the house payments were being made from this account. He told me not to worry about it." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Emma, this account is almost empty. The house should have been paid off 2 years ago. Instead, it's behind on payments and about to go into foreclosure." Emma's hand started to shake. "That can't be right. Richard was Daniel's friend. They worked together at the station for years. He came to us right after the funeral and said he wanted to help me, because Daniel would have wanted it that way." Jake studied the transfers again. Every single one went to the same account, He wrote down the name attached to it, though he already suspected what he would find. Richard Hayes. Jake had met him only once, briefly, at a moment when Emma introduced him as a family friend. He remembered a man with an easy smile and a firm handshake, the kind of man who seemed trustworthy on the surface. "He's been stealing from you," Jake said quietly. "For years." Emma sat back in her chair, her face pale. No, he wouldn't do that. He was Daniel's friend. But even as she said it, Jake could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. She remembered small things now, the way Richard always seemed to have an excuse ready when she asked about the house payments, the way he discouraged her from looking at the statements herself, telling her he had everything under control. Jake felt anger building in his chest, hot and heavy. This man had taken advantage of a grieving widow and her daughter. He had stolen money meant to keep a roof over their heads, money that was supposed to be Daniel's final gift to his family. Jake's hands curled into fists on the table. "I want to go find him right now," Jake said, his voice low and hard. "I want to make him answer for this." Emma reached across the table and placed her hand over his, steady despite her own shock. "Jake, look at me." He looked up and her eyes were calm, even though her voice trembled slightly. "Daniel believed in doing things the right way," she said. "He never went looking for a fight. He believed in justice, not revenge. If you go after Richard the way you want to right now, you'll only make things worse, for all of us." Jake sat there, breathing hard, the anger still burning under his skin. He wanted to hurt someone. He wanted Richard Hayes to feel even a fraction of what Emma and Lily had suffered. But Emma's hand stayed on his, steady and sure, and slowly, the fire in his chest began to cool into something else. Something more like determination. Jake did not sleep much that night. He lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind running through every way he could find Richard Hayes and make him pay. He knew where the fire station was. He knew he could find the man's address if he asked around. Old instincts, the ones that had gotten him into trouble as a younger man, whispered that this was how you handled things like this. You found the man who hurt your family, and you made sure he never did it again. But every time that thought crossed his mind, he heard Emma's voice. Steady, calm. Daniel believed in doing things the right way. So the next morning, instead of climbing on his motorcycle and riding to find Richard Hayes, Jake called Tom. "I need a favor," Jake said. "Not the kind you fix with a wrench." Tom Walker had a cousin who worked as a paralegal downtown, a sharp woman named Denise, who owed Tom a favor from years back. By that afternoon, Jake was sitting in a small office above a hardware store, spreading Daniel's bank statements across a desk while Denise studied them through her reading glasses. "This is clear as day," she said, tapping the page with her pen. "These transfers all go to the same account. Whoever set this up made it look like normal payments at first, small amounts. But look here." She pointed to a string of numbers. "These jumps are huge. Someone got greedy." "Can you prove it was him? Richard Hayes?" "The account is in his name. That's a start. But we'll need more. Bank records, maybe testimony from the fire department if he told co-workers he was managing the money. We build the case brick by brick. That's how you win these things, not by knocking down someone's door." Jake almost smiled at that. It was exactly what Emma would have said. Over the following days, Jake threw himself into gathering evidence the way he once threw himself into engine repairs, methodically, patiently, refusing to stop until every piece fit. He drove to the bank and requested copies of every statement tied to the account. He talked to a records clerk at the fire station, who quietly admitted that Richard had mentioned handling Carter family finances more than once, bragging about it like it made him a good friend. Jake wrote it all down. Dates, names, numbers. It was hard. harder than he expected. Every time he sat with the papers, he thought about Emma pretending to eat dinner so Lily wouldn't go hungry. He thought about Lily digging through trash cans in the cold, trying to protect her mother from a truth too heavy for a 10-year-old to carry. And every time, the anger rose up in him like a wave, wanting him to skip all of this, to drive straight to Richard's house and demand answers with his fists instead of his words. He didn't. Instead, he called Denise every evening with what he'd found. He met with a lawyer she recommended, a tired but kind man named Mr. Alvarez, who listened to the whole story and nodded slowly. "This is a strong case," Alvarez said. "Financial exploitation of a grieving widow. We can get the courts involved. We can recover the funds. But it takes time, Jake. It takes patience." Patience was not something Jake had ever been good at. But he thought of Daniel Carter, a man he had never truly known, but who had saved his life on the side of a highway years ago. A man who ran into burning buildings not for glory, but because it was right. Jake decided that if he was ever going to be worthy of that kind of sacrifice, he needed to fight this battle the same way Daniel would have. The right way. That night, he sat with Emma again at the kitchen table, the folder of evidence between them. Thicker now, filled with proof. "We have enough to take to the police," Jake told her. "Enough for a real case. It's not going to be fast. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be real justice, not something I did with my hands out of anger." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing this, for choosing us." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "I promise you, Emma, whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm going to make this right, not because I want revenge, because your family deserves to be protected, and I'm not going anywhere." Weeks passed like slow water. The case moved forward, but not fast. Denise called with updates that were sometimes exciting, sometimes just more waiting. Bank records had to be requested twice. The fire department was slow to release statements. Mr. Alvarez kept saying the same thing every time Jake called him. "We're building something solid, Jake. Solid takes time." Jake tried to be patient. He kept showing up at the Carter house almost every day. He fixed the fence in the backyard. He taught Lily how to check the oil in an old car he was restoring in his garage, letting her hold the dipstick with her small hands, while he explained what to look for. Emma started sleeping better, he could tell. The dark circles under her eyes were fading. She smiled more. But outside the walls of that little house, something else was happening. People in the neighborhood had started talking. It began small. A whisper here, a raised eyebrow there. Mrs. Delgado, who lived 2 houses down, mentioned to Sarah Bennett that she'd seen that biker coming and going from the Carter house at all hours. She said it in a tone that made it sound like something bad, even though nothing bad had happened. Then someone at the grocery store asked Emma outright why a Hell's Angel was so interested in a widow and her daughter. Emma had gone home shaking, though she didn't tell Jake right away. The rumors grew, the way rumors always do, twisting a little more each time they passed from one mouth to another. Some people said Jake was probably after Daniel's life insurance money. Others said a man like that couldn't possibly care about a little girl unless he wanted something in return. A few even brought up his motorcycle club, saying things about gangs and trouble, even though Jake's club did nothing but charity rides and fundraisers for sick kids. None of it was true. But truth has never been rumor's strong suit. Sarah Bennett, to her credit, tried to defend him. She told anyone who would listen about the groceries Jake brought, about the door he fixed, about the quiet way he had started showing up to help elderly neighbors carry in firewood without ever asking for thanks. But her voice was only one voice and the whispers were many. Lily started noticing kids at school looking at her differently. One boy asked her if it was true her mom's boyfriend was in a gang. Lily came home crying, though she wouldn't tell Emma why until her mother gently pulled it out of her that night. Emma held her daughter close, rocking her slowly, and felt something cold settle into her chest. Fear. Not fear of Jake. Fear for Jake. Fear for what this might mean for Lily's future, for the way people might treat her at school, for the way the whole town seemed ready to believe the worst about a man who had done nothing but good since the night he pushed open their broken front door. That night, after Lily had cried herself to sleep, Emma sat alone at the kitchen table with the porch light off. She thought about Daniel. She thought about what he would want. And she thought, painfully, about what was best for Lily. The next evening, when Jake came by with a bag of groceries, Emma met him on the porch instead of letting him inside. She wouldn't quite meet his eyes. "Jake," she said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand it's not because I don't trust you." Jake set the bag down slowly. Something in her voice already told him what was coming. "The talk in town," Emma continued, her voice trembling. "It's getting worse. Lily's hearing things at school. I'm scared, Jake. I'm scared of what people will do, what they'll say, how it will follow her. I think maybe you should step back. Just for a while. Until the case is settled. Until things calm down." Jake stood there, feeling like the ground had shifted under his boots. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that letting fear win was exactly what Richard Hayes wanted. Exactly what all the people who judged him by his leather vest wanted. But he saw the exhaustion in Emma's eyes, the fear for her daughter that outweighed everything else. And he understood. "Okay," he said quietly, "if that's what you need." He picked up his helmet from where he'd set it on the porch railing and walked back to his motorcycle without looking back. He rode home slower than usual, the wind cold against his face, feeling like he had lost the only family he had ever truly found. The garage was quiet. Too quiet. Jake sat on an old wooden stool next to the motorcycle he had been fixing for weeks, the one Lily liked to sit near while he worked. Her small red bicycle was still leaned up against the wall where she left it 3 days ago after riding over to help him clean spark plugs. He hadn't moved it. He couldn't make himself move it. The morning light came through the garage windows, in thin gray lines. Jake stared at his hands. They were rough hands, scarred from years of engine work and road accidents, hands that people flinched away from when he reached out to shake theirs. But those same hands had learned how to hold a paintbrush steady while Lily painted flowers on the porch railing. They had learned how to carry grocery bags up broken steps without letting the bags show how heavy they really were. Now those hands just sat empty in his lap. He told himself it was the right thing. Emma was scared for her daughter, and a scared mother had every right to protect her child. That was not weakness. That was love. Jake understood that. He had grown up watching his own mother do the same thing, pulling him back from danger even when it broke her heart to do it. But understanding something didn't make it hurt less. He thought about the rumors floating through the neighborhood like smoke, twisting the truth until it didn't look like truth anymore. People saying he wanted money. People saying a man like him couldn't care about a family without wanting something in return. It made his chest tight with anger, not because they doubted him, but because their doubt was landing on Lily. A 10-year-old girl was being punished at school for the crime of being kind to him. Maybe stepping back really was the right choice. Jake picked up a wrench and turned it over in his hands, not using it, just holding it. The motorcycle in front of him was almost finished. He had been planning on giving Lily her first real ride around the block when it was done, holding the handlebars steady while she sat safely in front of him. Now he wondered if that would ever happen. He thought about Daniel Carter, a man he never truly knew but felt connected to in ways he couldn't fully explain. A man who ran into fire to save strangers, who left behind a wife and daughter who loved him more than anything. Jake wondered what Daniel would think of him now, sitting in an empty garage, giving up the one family he had built because the world was too loud and too unkind to let it stay quiet. He set the wrench down and rubbed his face with both hands. That's when he heard the small crunch of gravel outside. Jake lifted his head. And there she was. Lily stood in the open garage doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her school shoes untied like she had left in a hurry. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her eyes were serious in a way that made her look older than 10. "Lily," Jake said, standing up quickly, "does your mom know you're here?" Lily shook her head. "I rode my bike. I have to go back before she notices." Jake's chest tightened. "You shouldn't have come. It's not safe, and your mom asked me to stay away for a while." "I know," Lily said. Her voice was steady, though her hands were shaking slightly at her sides. "But I had to tell you something." She stepped further into the garage, past the motorcycle, past the toolbox, until she was standing right in front of him. "I don't care what people say about you," she said. "I know who you are. You're not scary. You're the person who fixed our door when nobody else even knocked on it." Jake felt something crack open in his chest. "My dad used to say that being strong means protecting people, not hurting them," Lily continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. "You protect us, Jake. You always have. I don't want you to go away just because people are scared of things that aren't true." Jake knelt down so he was eye level with her, his throat tight. "I believe in you," Lily said quietly. "Please don't leave us." The next morning, Lily woke up before the sun was even all the way in the sky. She sat at the kitchen table with a pencil in her hand and a stack of paper her mother used for grocery lists. Emma was still asleep down the hall, tired from another long night of worrying. Lily chewed on the end of her pencil and thought about what to write. She was only 10, but she knew exactly what she wanted to say. She had thought about it the whole bike ride home from Jake's garage. She started with the letter to Mrs. Bennett first, because Mrs. Bennett always waved at her from her porch, even on the hard days. "Dear Mrs. Bennett, my name is Lily Carter. I live 2 houses down from you. I want to tell you about my friend Jake. Everyone calls him scary because of his motorcycle jacket and his tattoos. But he is not scary. Last winter, our front door was broken. It hung crooked and cold air came in every night. My mom was too sad and too tired to fix it. Nobody knocked on our door to ask if we were okay. Jake did. He fixed our door the next morning. He brought us groceries when our refrigerator was empty. He never asked for anything back. He just wanted to help. People are saying bad things about him now, and it is not fair. He is the kindest person I know. Please don't believe the bad things. Please get to know him like I did." Love, Lily Carter. She wrote the same kind of letter, changing small parts, for every house on the street. She wrote one for old Mr. Perkins, who fed the birds every morning. She wrote one for the Yang family, who had a new baby. She wrote one for the Coopers, who had once crossed the street to avoid walking past Jake's garage. She folded each letter carefully and slid them into envelopes she found in her mom's desk drawer. Then, before Emma woke up, Lily grabbed her backpack, filled it with the envelopes, and walked quietly down the sidewalk, slipping one into each mailbox along the street. Her hands were cold by the time she finished, but her heart felt warm. She thought about her dad, and how he always said the truth was worth telling, even when it was scary to tell it. By the afternoon, something in the neighborhood had shifted. Mrs. Bennett was the first to knock on Jake's garage door. She stood there with her cane in one hand and Lily's letter in the other, her eyes wet with tears. "I read what that sweet girl wrote," she said, her voice shaking a little. "I judged you the moment I saw you ride down this street on that motorcycle. I never gave you a chance. I'm sorry, Jake. I truly am." Jake didn't know what to say. He just nodded, his throat too tight for words. Word spread quickly after that. The Yang family came by with a plate of food, thanking him for looking out for Lily and Emma when nobody else had noticed their struggle. Mr. Perkins stopped Jake on the sidewalk and shook his hand, something he had never done before, and told him he was proud to call him a neighbor. Even the Coopers, who had crossed the street so many times to avoid him, came to his door with an apology and a plate of cookies still warm from the oven. "We were wrong about you," Mr. Cooper said, looking down at his shoes. "We let the way you looked scare us instead of looking at what you actually did. Lily's letter opened our eyes. We're sorry." One by one, doors that had once stayed shut against Jake began opening instead. Neighbors who had whispered behind his back now waved at him from across the street. Some brought supplies to help finish the porch railing Lily had painted flowers on. Others simply stopped by to say thank you, to admit they had been wrong, to ask how they could help the Carter family now that the truth was finally out in the open. The same community that had once pushed Jake away because of his leather vest and quiet, tough exterior was now standing beside him, choosing to see the man Lily had always known him to be. Over the next few days, the Carter house did not feel like a broken place anymore. It felt like the middle of something good. Emma stood at her kitchen window one morning, coffee cup warm in her hands, and watched a truck pull up outside. Tom Walker climbed out, along with two other men from Jake's motorcycle club. They carried lumber and paint cans and a new mailbox to replace the one that had been rusted shut for 2 years. She had not asked for any of this. She had not even known it was happening. "Jake said the fence needed fixing," Tom called out to her, tipping his head in a friendly way. "Figured we'd knock it out before it gets colder." Emma did not know what to say. She simply nodded and watched them work. By Wednesday, Mrs. Bennett had organized a group of neighbors to bring meals for the family 3 times a week, so Emma would not have to worry about cooking every night. She said it was the least she could do after not knocking on their door sooner. By Thursday, the Yang family dropped off a bag of winter clothes for Lily, since she had grown out of her old coat. Mrs. Yang waved off any thanks, saying it was what neighbors were supposed to do for each other. By Friday, Mr. Perkins showed up with a box of tools he no longer used, saying Jake might find them helpful for the porch. He stayed for almost an hour, talking with Emma on the steps about his own wife, who had passed years before, and how lonely a house could feel when grief moved in and refused to leave. Emma listened to every story. She smiled more than she had in months. Through all of it, Jake stayed quiet. He worked on the house in the early mornings before anyone else was awake, fixing squeaky floorboards and patching the roof where it leaked. He never asked for thanks. He never lingered for praise. By the time the neighbors came by to help, he had already moved on to the next thing that needed fixing. Like a man trying to outrun the guilt of ever being asked to leave in the first place. Emma noticed this. She noticed everything now. She noticed how the neighborhood had changed because of one man who had never asked for credit, who had simply shown up when nobody else did. She noticed how her daughter had gotten her spark back, laughing again as she followed Jake around the yard with a paintbrush in her hand. She noticed how the house did not feel so heavy anymore. And she noticed the quiet space Jake had put between himself and her, Ever since the day she told him to leave. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Emma walked out to the garage, where Jake was wiping grease off his hands with an old rag. The porch light above him buzzed softly. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, but he did not smile the way he used to. "Jake," Emma said, her voice shaking a little. "I need to say something." He set the rag down and waited. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold something together. "I was wrong to ask you to leave. I let what people were saying scare me, instead of trusting what I already knew about you." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "The truth is, I was scared of losing someone else I loved. I lost Daniel. I couldn't survive losing another person Lily cared about too. So I pushed you away first, before you could leave on your own." Jake's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. "I'm not going anywhere, Emma," he said quietly. "Not unless you tell me you don't want me here anymore. And even then, I'd still be checking on you and Lily, making sure you were safe." Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't want you to leave. I never did. I was just afraid." Jake stepped closer, his voice steady and low. "Fear makes people do things they don't mean. I've spent my whole life being judged by people who were afraid of what I looked like. I understand fear better than most people do. But I'm not going to let it push me away from you and Lily. Not after everything we've built." Emma nodded, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. "Thank you for not giving up on us." "I never will," Jake said. They stood there together in the quiet evening air, the distance between them finally closing, replaced by something steadier and stronger than it had been before. The law office smelled like old coffee and paper. Emma sat in a stiff chair with Lily beside her, holding her hand so tight her knuckles turned white. Jake stood behind them, arms crossed, his leather vest looking out of place among the neat wooden shelves and framed diplomas on the wall. Their attorney was a woman named Denise Cho. She had short gray hair and kind eyes that had seen a lot of hard cases. She had been working on the Carter file for 3 weeks straight, pulling bank records, old letters, and signatures that did not match. "Thank you all for coming in," Denise said, opening a thick folder on her desk. "I know this has been a long wait, but I think you're going to like what I found." Lily looked up at her mother. Emma squeezed her hand tighter. Denise pulled out a stack of papers and spread them across the desk. "Richard Hayes handled your husband's estate after he passed, Emma. Part of that job was making sure the house payment, which Daniel had already set up to be paid in full, actually went through to the bank." Emma nodded slowly. She remembered signing papers in a fog of grief, barely understanding what she was agreeing to. "It didn't go through," Denise said. "Richard redirected the money into an account under a company name, a company he owns. He then created new loan paperwork, making it look like the house was never paid off at all. He forged Daniel's signature on some of it." The room went quiet. Lily's mouth fell open. "He stole from us?" Emma whispered. "From Daniel?" "Yes," Denise said gently. "For almost 2 years now." Jake's hands tightened into fists at his sides, but he stayed quiet, letting Emma have this moment. Denise slid a folder across the desk toward Emma. "Bank records confirm everything. Emails between Richard and the loan company confirm it, too. He tried to cover his tracks, but he wasn't careful enough. Digital records don't disappear as easily as people think." "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice shaking. "The court has already reviewed the evidence," Denise said. "Richard Hayes has been ordered to return every dollar he took, plus damages for what this put your family through. The foreclosure notice on your home is canceled. Your house is no longer at risk. Legally, it was already paid off years ago, exactly the way Daniel intended. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "So, we get to keep our house? For real?" Denise smiled at her. "For real, sweetheart. It's yours. It always was." Lily turned and buried her face into Emma's side, crying the kind of tears that come from relief instead of fear. Emma wrapped her arms around her daughter, tears sliding down her own cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you," Emma said to Denise. "You don't have to thank me," Denise said. "Thank the paperwork, and thank him." She nodded toward Jake. "He's the one who brought me the first lead, the bank statement that didn't add up. Without that, none of this gets found." Emma looked back at Jake, who shifted uncomfortably under the attention, the way he always did. "I just followed the numbers," Jake said quietly. "Denise did the real work." "Jake," Emma said, standing up, "you saved this family twice now." Jake shook his head. "Your husband saved me first. This is just me trying to keep up." Lily wiped her eyes and looked at Denise. "What happens to Richard?" "He'll face criminal charges," Denise said. "Fraud, forgery, theft. He's going to have to answer for what he did in front of a judge." Lily nodded slowly, like she was letting that sink in. She didn't smile about it. She didn't look angry either. She just looked like a kid who finally understood that fairness could still exist in the world, even after everything her family had lost. Emma reached out and took Denise's hand, shaking it firmly. "Thank you. For real." "It's my job," Denise said, "but I'm glad this one had a good ending." Outside the office, the afternoon sun was warm and bright. Emma stood on the sidewalk with Lily pressed against her side, and Jake standing close, the three of them quiet for a moment, just breathing in the fact that the house was safe. The fear that had been sitting on their shoulders for months was finally gone. Jake did not tell them where they were going. He just asked if they had an hour to spare, and Emma had said yes without asking why. Lily sat in the back seat of Jake's truck, her knees bouncing with the kind of nervous energy that came from not knowing what was next, but trusting the man driving anyway. They pulled into a small park near the center of town, one Emma had passed 100 times but never really looked at. A stone wall stood at the far end, curved like a half circle, with names carved into its face. In front of it stood a bronze statue of a firefighter, helmet in one hand, looking out over the grass like he was still watching for smoke on the horizon. "The firefighter memorial," Emma said softly, recognizing it now. She had been here once before, the day it was dedicated, back when her grief was still too fresh to let her read the names carved in stone. Jake parked the truck and turned off the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, his hands still on the wheel. "I used to drive past this place and never stop," he said. "Didn't think I had the right." Lily leaned forward between the seats. "Why not?" Jake looked at her in the mirror. "Because I never knew which name to thank." They walked together across the grass, Lily's hand slipping into Jake's without either of them deciding it should happen. Emma walked on his other side, her eyes already scanning the wall before they even reached it. Jake stopped in front of a section near the middle. He did not need to search. He had looked up the plot number weeks ago and never told anyone why. "There," he said, pointing. Daniel Carter's name was carved deep into the stone, clean and permanent, sitting among dozens of others who had given everything for people they never met. Lily reached out and touched the letters of her father's name, like she was checking that they were real. "I was 26, Jake said, his voice rougher than usual. "Riding home from a run upstate. Rain came down so hard I couldn't see the road. Truck ahead of me jackknifed and I went off the highway, flipped twice before I stopped." Emma's hand found her chest. I remember waking up upside down, Jake continued. Metal everywhere. Couldn't feel my legs. Couldn't get my hands to work right. And there was this voice, calm, steady, telling me to stay awake, to keep talking to him, that he wasn't going anywhere. Lily's eyes were fixed on him now, wide and unblinking. He cut me out of that truck with his own hands before the jaws of life even showed up, Jake said. Held my head so I wouldn't choke on my own blood. Told me his shift was almost over, but he wasn't leaving until I was safe in the ambulance. That was Daddy, Lily whispered. Jake nodded slowly. I didn't know his name back then. Everything happened too fast. And by the time I was stable enough to ask, he was already gone, off to the next call. I spent years trying to find him. Never could. Until me, Lily said. Until you, Jake said, his voice breaking just slightly. A hungry little girl digging through trash cans led me straight back to the man who saved my life. I didn't even know it until I saw his name on that firefighter roster. Your father pulled me out of a wreck years before either of us knew you'd exist. And somehow, I ended up living 2 houses down from the family he left behind. Emma pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping quietly down her face. Lily let go of Jake's hand and knelt down at the base of the memorial. She had brought a small bundle of flowers from Emma's garden, the same one Daniel had planted years ago, now blooming again thanks to Jake's work restoring it. She laid them gently beneath her father's name. I think you found us because Daddy sent you, Lily said, looking up at Jake. He couldn't come home anymore, so he brought you instead. Jake knelt beside her, his throat tight, unable to speak for a moment. He looked at Daniel's name, carved into the stone, permanent and unmoving, the same way the man's kindness had never stopped moving through the world even after he was gone. He understood now that saving a life did not end when the rescue was over. It kept going, passed from one person to the next, long after the hands that gave it were gone. Spring came to the Carter house the way it comes to a garden that has been given a second chance. Slow at first, then all at once. The front door was new now, painted a deep, warm red that Lily had picked out herself. It hung straight, and even on its hinges, opening and closing with a soft, solid click instead of the old crooked groan that used to fill Emma with dread every time the wind blew. The porch light worked. It clicked on every evening at dusk, casting a soft yellow glow across steps that Tom and the rest of Jake's motorcycle brothers had rebuilt board by board. The garden along the side of the house was full again. Tomato plants climbed up wooden stakes. Marigolds lined the walkway in bright orange rows. Emma knelt there most mornings now, her hands in the dirt, the same dirt Daniel had once turned with his own hands years before. It did not hurt the way it used to. It felt like something being carried forward instead of something being lost. Inside, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee. The refrigerator hummed, full and steady, never empty anymore. Lily sat at the table doing her homework, her feet swinging under her chair, no longer thin and worried but round-faced and laughing at something on the television in the next room. Jake came through the back door carrying a toolbox, setting it down by the counter like he had done 100 times before. He had his own key now. Emma had given it to him on a Tuesday afternoon, without any big speech, just held it out and said, "You're here enough. Might as well stop knocking." He had not said anything back. He had just closed his hand around it and nodded, his eyes a little too bright for a man who never cried. "Dinner's almost ready," Emma called from the stove, and Jake pulled off his jacket and hung it on the hook by the door, the same hook where his leather vest hung most nights now, right next to Lily's backpack and Emma's garden gloves. It looked like it belonged there. Nobody in that house thought twice about it anymore. Emma had a job now, working at the flower shop 2 streets over, the same shop that had once donated flowers for the memorial dedication. She came home most days with dirt under her fingernails and a tired kind of happiness in her face. the kind that came from work she chose instead of work she was forced into by fear. She stood up straighter these days. She looked people in the eye when she spoke to them. The woman who once hid in her kitchen pretending to eat so her daughter would not worry was gone, replaced by someone who laughed more, who slept through the night, who no longer flinched at the sound of an envelope hitting the mailbox. Lily never searched through trash cans anymore. She did not need to. But some evenings, she still walked with Jake to the edge of the neighborhood, a bag of extra groceries in her arms, delivering food to families who needed it the way her own family once had. She had learned that kindness was not something you only received. It was something you carried forward, the same way her father had carried it, the same way Jake now carried it too. "Table's set," Lily announced, sliding her homework aside and setting out 4 plates instead of 3, the way she always did now. Jake noticed the 4th plate every single time. He never said anything about it. He did not have to. It was simply understood, the same way the wooden sign hanging above his garage was understood, the one Lily had carved with careful, uneven letters that read, "Everyone deserves someone who opens the door." He sat down at that table now like he had always belonged there, elbows resting on the wood, listening to Lily talk about her day at school, listening to Emma laugh at something silly Lily said, feeling the warmth of that kitchen settle into his chest the way it never had anywhere else in his life. He was not replacing anyone. He understood that clearly now. He was simply the man Daniel Carter's kindness had led home, given a second chance to matter, given a family who chose him back. And for the first time in a very long time, Jake Miller did not feel like a man people were afraid of. He felt like a man who was loved. The whole street smelled like barbecue smoke and fresh-cut grass. Folding tables lined the sidewalk in front of the Carter house, covered in checkered cloths that flapped gently in the evening breeze. Someone had strung up paper lanterns between the porch posts and the old oak tree in the yard, and they glowed soft orange as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops. Kids ran between the tables chasing each other, their laughter mixing with the sound of country music playing from a small speaker someone had set up near the driveway. 1 year. It had been 1 year since Jake pushed open a broken door that nobody else would touch. Sarah Bennett arrived first, carrying a casserole dish covered in foil, her silver hair pinned up neat the way it always was. She spotted Jake standing near the grill, flipping burgers with Tom Walker at his side, and she walked right up to him without a moment of hesitation. "Smells wonderful," she said, setting the dish down on the nearest table. "You've gotten better at that grill since last summer." Jake almost smiled. A year ago, Sarah would have crossed the street rather than walk past his driveway. Now she stood beside him like they were old friends, because in a way, they had become exactly that. "Tom taught me," Jake said. "Turns out I was burning everything before." "Still are," Tom said, and Sarah laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came easy now. More neighbors arrived as the sky darkened. The Hendersons brought potato salad. The young couple from the corner house brought a cooler full of lemonade. An older man Jake barely knew, someone who used to nod stiffly whenever Jake passed on his motorcycle, walked up and shook his hand firm, looking him straight in the eye. "Heard what you did for this family," the man said. "Wanted to thank you myself." Jake did not know what to say to that. He was not used to being thanked. He was used to being watched, avoided, whispered about behind curtains. But here, on this street, under these lanterns, something had shifted for good. Emma moved through the crowd with a plate of fresh bread, stopping to talk with the flower shop owner, laughing easily with a woman from down the block. She looked lighter than Jake had ever seen her, her shoulders back, her voice steady and warm. She caught his eye across the yard and gave him a small smile, the kind that said everything without needing words. Lily was somewhere in the middle of it all, weaving between tables with a pitcher of lemonade, refilling cups, chatting with every single person like she had known them her whole life. She had grown taller over the past year. Her cheeks were full and pink, her laugh loud and unafraid. She was no longer the girl who hid in shadows searching trash cans in the dark. She was the girl who lit up a whole street just by walking through it. As the sun disappeared completely, and the lanterns became the only light, Lily disappeared inside the house for a moment. When she came back out, she carried something behind her back, grinning so wide her whole face seemed to glow. "Jake," she said, walking up to him near the grill, "I made you something." She pulled her hands out from behind her back and held up a piece of wood, sanded smooth and painted a soft white. Letters had been carved into it carefully, some crooked, some slanted, clearly the work of small hands that had practiced for hours to get it right. "Everyone deserves someone who opens the door." Jake stared at it for a long moment. His throat tightened in a way it had not since the day he stood at Daniel Carter's grave and finally understood who had saved his life all those years ago. "I wanted you to have it," Lily said, "because you opened ours." Jake crouched down so he was eye level with her, taking the sign in both hands like it was something precious, because to him it was. "I'm going to hang this up," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Somewhere I'll see it every day." Lily beamed. Later that night, after the tables were folded and the lanterns had burned low, Jake carried the sign home to his garage. He found a hammer and a single nail, and he hung it right above the door where the porch light would catch it every evening when he pulled in. He stepped back and looked at it, the crooked letters glowing faint in the dark. "Everyone deserves someone who opens the door." Jake stepped out of the garage and walked back toward the yard, the sound of laughter still hanging in the warm night air. Most of the tables had been folded up and carried away, but a few people lingered, sitting in lawn chairs under the paper lanterns, talking quietly the way people do when they don't want a good night to end. Emma had pulled 2 chairs close to the porch steps, and Lily sat on the top step between them, her legs stretched out, a half-empty cup of lemonade balanced on her knee. Jake lowered himself into the empty chair beside Emma with a small grunt, the kind that came from a long day of standing over a hot grill. "You hung it already?" Emma asked, glancing toward the garage where the sign now caught the porch light. "Didn't want to wait," Jake said. "Some things you don't put off." Lily smiled without looking up, tracing the rim of her cup with one finger. For a while, nobody said much of anything. The music had stopped. Crickets took over instead, filling the quiet with their steady hum. Somewhere down the street, a screen door slammed, and a dog barked twice before going silent again. The neighborhood settled the way neighborhoods do at the end of a long, good day. Jake looked out at the yard. He could still see, if he closed his eyes, the tables lined up, the neighbors moving between them, people who used to cross the street now standing shoulder to shoulder with him, like it was nothing at all. A year ago, none of this would have seemed possible. A year ago, he was just the man on the motorcycle nobody wanted to look at too long. He thought about that night behind the trash cans, the way Lily's small shadow had moved careful and quiet, like she was trying not to exist. He remembered the anger that had risen in his chest, not at her, but at everything that had let a child get to that point. He remembered the crooked door, the dark windows, the way his knock had gone unanswered because Emma was too afraid of what judgment might walk through it. He had almost turned around that night. He could have told himself it wasn't his business. He could have gone back to his garage, back to his quiet life of fixing motorcycles and feeding stray cats, where nobody would notice or care. That would have been easy. Nobody would have blamed him for staying out of it. But something in him had refused to let that door stay closed. "You're quiet," Emma said, watching him. Jake shook his head slowly. "Just thinking." About what? He looked at her, then at Lily, who had finally lifted her eyes from her cup and was watching him too, waiting. About how one night changed everything, Jake said. I saw a kid digging through trash, and I could have just kept walking. Wouldn't have been hard. People do it every day. Look away, keep moving. Tell themselves it's not their problem. But you didn't, Lily said. No, Jake said. I didn't. He thought about Daniel then, the man he had never properly thanked, the voice in the wreckage all those years ago telling him to stay awake. Stay awake, help is coming. He had spent years believing that debt could never be repaid, that some kindness was too large to ever give back. He had carried that guilt like a stone in his chest, certain he would die still owing it. But he understood now that he had been wrong about that. He hadn't repaid Daniel by pulling one person from a wreck, the way Daniel had once pulled him. He hadn't repaid him with some grand gesture or single heroic act. He had repaid him slowly, quietly, every single day since that night behind the trash cans, fixing the door, filling the refrigerator, sitting through Lily's homework at the kitchen table, standing beside Emma through the foreclosure fight, showing up again and again when it would have been easier to disappear. That was the debt paid in full. Not one dramatic rescue, but 1,000 small choices to stay. Jake reached over and rested his rough hand on Lily's shoulder, and she leaned into him without a word, the way she always did now, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I think, Jake said quietly, I finally figured out how to pay somebody back. Emma looked at him, and in the porch light, he could see she understood exactly what he meant. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.